Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, my apologies for a very brief delay. I'm pleased to welcome you to this online workshop, which is organized by Hinicio and co-hosted by the Dutch Association of Sustainable Energy, NVDE. So my name is Wouter van Oud. I'm the director for Europe at Hinicio. We are a strategic consultancy specialized in sustainable energy and mobility, and we've been running a competence center on hydrogen since our inception more than 15 years ago. Our customer base is in Europe and globally. So that's about Hinicio. The subject of today's discussion is actually about the creation of an enabling regulatory framework for renewable fuels of non-biological origin in Europe, and focusing on the implementation and revision of the RED II in that regard. We have very distinguished speakers who are all pioneers in the deployment of hydrogen and its derived fuels, and our political champions committed to delivering Europeans' ambition for net zero targets and creating a European hydrogen economy. I'll quickly present you the agenda of today. We will start by Ms. Maria Spiraki, who is a member of the European Parliament and part of the ITRE committee. She will give a keynote speech setting the scene for today's debate. Then I will hand over towards Bart Bieberg, who is the Executive Director of the Fuel Cell Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, who will share his perspective on this topic. And after those keynote addresses, we will move to two panel sessions where we will be debating the current barriers to the commercial deployment of RFNBOs and the opportunities for addressing those. The panel discussion will be followed by a keynote address by Nienke Homan, who is the Regional Minister of the Green Hydrogen Economy, who is responsible for the province of Groningen, that's north of the Netherlands. And we will be focusing on the Netherlands as a case study. And then there will be a discussion with Nienke Homan and Patrick Knuben of New Energy Coalition, the latter being the coordinator of the Heaven project, which is about the creation of a first hydrogen valley in northern Netherlands. As a background, I would like to remind to everyone that the purpose of this event is to gather your input, and that also recommendations will be distilled out of this session that will be fed into the ongoing public consultation on the RED II revision, which is organized by the Commission, and we will of course focus on RFNBOs. With that, I'm going to close my my introduction, and I'm going to hand over the word towards Maria Spiraki, member of the European Parliament and ITRE committee member. Ms. Spiraki, the floor is yours.
First of all, you hear me? Thank you. Thank you for having me. I would like to start by thanking the organizer who put together this timely event, and I would like to say that it is my pleasure to open today's event together with Bart Bieberg of the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, and to set the context for the discussion that we will have. Hydrogen is a central element of the EU plans in meeting the net zero emissions target by mid-century. It is, according to my opinion, not the silver bullet for the decarbonization of our energy mix, but it is the energy carrier that we have to invest more heavily. Hydrogen can be used as a feedstock, a fuel, or an energy carrier and storage, and has many possible applications across industry, transport, power and building sector, as the Commission underlined on its relevant communication. However, before we welcome the new hydrogen decade, we have to become very, very well prepared on the following fundamental aspects which will finally affect the success of the strategy. First, it is fostering uptake of hydrogen-derived fuels in hard-to-abate sector. Constitutes one of the key pillars and priorities of the EU strategy on energy system integration and EU hydrogen strategy. Indeed, next to sustainable biogas, biomethane, and biofuels, renewable and low-carbon hydrogen or synthetic fuels are essentials for decarbonization of industrial processes, but also transport modes such as aviation and maritime. We need rapid development of synthetic fuels across the whole value chain of the industry in Europe, better coordination of the market actors, and rapid increase of the production capacity. The reality is that moving from a vision to action will require significant investments, and it is the second aspect that I would like to focus. For instance, it takes some 160 to 200 million to convert a typical EU steel installation coming to an end of life to hydrogen. And as the EU hydrogen strategy indicates in the road transport sector, rolling out an additional 400 small-scale hydrogen refueling stations compared to 100 which is existing today could require investments of 850 to 1,000 million. Our European industry has already been actively looking for business opportunities for using hydrogen and derived renewable and low-carbon gases, liquids and chemical feedstocks in hard-to-update sectors such as steel and chemicals, as well as transport sector and refineries. However, the biggest challenge our industry is facing today is that of predictability and certainty. In this regard, the regulatory framework is of paramount importance, especially on the sectors that it is hard to abate from one fuel to another. A number of projects that are currently being delayed, including that related to RED II implementation and the relevant clauses related to renewable fuels of non-biological origins. And the revision of the directive we are talking on, it is the revision of the renewables, the so-called RED, and now we are working on RED II, creates an opportunity to address this challenge. It opens the window of opportunity to introduce additional measures to support renewables and low-carbon fuels, possibly through minimum shares of quotas in specific end-use sectors, including aviation and maritimes, which are two sectors that are needed to become a part of the global level playing field issue, because as you can understand, it is a global issue and it needs a wider approach, not only a European approach. It can also provide the basis for the establishment of a comprehensive technology for all renewable and low-carbon fuels and the European system of certification of such fuels based notably on full life cycle greenhouse gas emission savings and sustainability. By creating a robust framework for renewable fuels of non-biological origin, deployment at EU level must be recognized as a policy priority by the Commission in the context of the revision of RED II. Consequently, there is a need to assess rethink the role of the Renewable Energy Directive in contributing to achieving these objectives and accelerating the transition to a more integrated system, with hydrogen being a key part of this effort. Significantly more ambitious greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in line with the European Green Deal shall be accompanied by the possibility to count the contribution of renewable and low-carbon energy in order to achieve the desired climate impact. The RED should promote further development and deployment of renewables and especially renewable hydrogen. However, the current iteration of the directive, the RED II, so-called RED II, was drafted and agreed on in a different context and spirit to that of today, and that's why we have to update the existing text. The Green Deal has set a clear pathway towards climate neutrality and firmly underlines the importance of a well-balanced RED and a concerted regulatory environment that enables a positive investment environment for existing players and market challenges to enable the scaling up and deployment of hydrogen and hydrogen technologies. Furthermore, the European Commission's hydrogen strategy, which is published on 8th of July 2020, clearly highlights and underlines the importance of hydrogen in achieving energy system integration and climate neutrality across the EU economy, with hydrogen expected to meet between 14 to 24% of energy demand in 2050. The EU hydrogen strategy set two clear objectives for hydrogen in 2024 and to 2030. Specifically, and I would like just to remind it to the audience, by 2024, the EU has an objective of producing 1 million tons of renewable hydrogen and at least 6 gigawatt of installed electrolyzer capacity. By 2030, the objective is to reach an installation capacity of 2 times of 40 gigawatt to produce renewable hydrogen, because it is 40 gigawatt in Europe and 40 gigawatt outside the EU. In order to achieve these objectives and to support the decarbonization of our economy, these are the numbers that we need to meet, and there is a number of challenges posed by the RED II which needs to be addressed. Our climate objectives as a union have evolved. Technological breakthroughs and advancement continue to evolve together with the decline in cost of renewable hydrogen production. In the same vein, our legislation should evolve and adapt as well. The production of hydrogen and derived renewable and low carbon gases from renewable energy contributes to decouple the deployment of renewable energy from grid bottlenecks, unlocking the full potential of renewable energy to replace fossil energy carriers in all sectors of our economy beyond the power sector. Hydrogen and derived renewables and low carbon gases, liquids and chemicals feedstocks allow integrating ever-growing amounts of renewable energy into so-called hard to abate sectors, such as it is steel, it is the chemical sector, it is the transport, it includes refineries, maritime and aviation, as I have already mentioned. As highlighted by the EU hydrogen strategy and the communication on energy system integration, climate neutrality across all sectors of the economy requires hydrogen and derived renewables and low carbon gases, liquids and chemical feedstock as one of the many solutions. In order to enable the achievement of EU's climate target in 2030 and furthermore in 2050, hydrogen needs to start being deployed at large scale across different sectors as soon as possible. That's why the Renewable Energy Directive, the RED, could be part of a framework to turn renewable solutions into business cases. And it is important that it must be a part of a wider policy framework that also provide fiscal support for first plants and fuels, support for infrastructure, supply-side measures to produce alternative fueled vehicles, and demand-side support for consumers. I look forward to today's debate and hearing from project developers about the key elements of the regulatory barriers which should be lifted, the main elements of the current legislative framework which need to be revised, and your recommendation on ways of incentivizing the uptake of renewable fuels of non-biological origins, not only at national, but also at the European level. Once again, thank you very much for organizing this very important and very interesting webinar. Thank you.
I would like to thank you, Ms. Spiraki, for giving this keynote speech. I think you have been given a very good overview of hydrogen in general, all of the initiatives that have been taken by the European Commission. I think you've been underpinning the fact that hydrogen is an important element of the energy transition. It's definitely not the silver bullet. You've been clearly mentioning that to move from strategy into action, that quite a lot of investment will be needed. You mentioned 400 hydrogen refueling station can be in a capex of 850 million euros up to 1 billion. And you've been underpinning that the clauses of the RED II, what some people will refer to as delegated acts, are critical importance to have a good and stable policy framework for investment. And you've been clearly mentioning what are the chances of the RED II revision to work on those delegated acts and the RED II in itself for RFNBO recognition. So I thank you for underpinning this this very important topic of regulatory uncertainty. And thank you for sharing your views and your active engagement to create such a robust policy framework for hydrogen deployment. Let's now see how we can move from vision into action. And I'm inviting the floor to Bart Biebuyck, Executive Director of the Fuel Cell Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, to give a little bit his perspective on this topic. Bart, the floor is yours. Bart, if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Wouter, for your kind introduction, and also big thanks to Mrs. Spiraki for your continuous support for the hydrogen sector. Your support is really very important to us. I believe that the topic of today is from really most importance. It really will unlock the hydrogen potential for the economy, because the guarantees of origins or certifications are really crucial. And I think during the debate today, you will definitely hear that. But I want to take you just one step back a little bit, back in the history, to tell you a little bit that what the FCHJU has done actually to come to this point where we are now need for those certifications. Well, first of all, the FCHJU has been developing the technology. Man, to give you one example, the electrolyzer technology, you know that we move it from kilowatt scale to megawatt scale. We went up to 60 megawatt now that we are supporting in the Hydrogen Valley. But also now recently the Green Deal has launched a 100 megawatt call for proposals. And actually I heard that several projects have applied for it. So it means that already today, even 100 megawatt seems to become a real option. At the same time, by scaling up, we reduce the cost for electrolyzers, we increase the efficiency. I mean, we have projects that now show up over 80% of efficiency. So, and this is what we wanted really to see. A second thing that we did was showing a lot of demonstrations in various transportation means, in cars, in buses, trucks, very soon also trains we will have in projects. And actually, some of these demos actually are now using the guarantees of origins from Certify. And there you can see a very nice synergy between different projects that we are running. Of course, the idea of having those demos is really to show to the general public or to policymakers that really that this technology is working, is matured, and also by doing so, of course, to spur the demand. That also Mrs. Spiraki mentioned that demand is now important. Also, what we did was really to increase the awareness raising. With demos, of course, we can raise the awareness, but also we went in the field with our products to go to policymakers in various countries in Europe. We did many trips in Central and Eastern Europe, really to make aware policymakers about the potential of this technology, but also the potential to create jobs and growth in their region. And I would say that recently now the Hydrogen Valley, the Heaven project in Northern Netherlands is really one of the best ways also to raise awareness, especially also locally among the citizens over there in the Groningen area and so on. But also because of the importance of this Hydrogen Valley, a lot of people outside of Europe are looking to that project. In addition, and to come a bit to the topic of today, in addition, we also launched in 2014 already the Certify project with Certify 1, where we first decided with the industry what is the definition of the different colors of hydrogen. And then in Certify 2, a bit later, we said, okay, let's now try that in the field. So we had 4 pilot plants really creating those guarantees of origins. And now recently we started Certify 3. Certify 3 will basically help to roll out this guarantees of origin scheme across the European Union to be ready by the end of 2021 and when the RED II is requiring it. So just for information, we spent already 1.5 million euro in Certify. So it's quite a lot of money. And for us, it is now also very important that this scheme will be used outside of Europe. So it's important to try to see how Australia or Chile or even Morocco will use our certification system or guarantees of origin system, because for them it's really important, because if they want to export later on green hydrogen to Europe, we will need to make sure that we have the same understanding of the hydrogen production process and the allocation of CO2 to each of the different production processes. Very important, in parallel to all the activity that we did, was that the world didn't stop. It didn't wait for us to develop. Actually, climate change became really became a reality. I mean, people started to feel it. I mean, the droughts that we had, or the big storms, very severe storms actually that we had. And you saw that even after Paris, many countries really took measures, policy measures, to address climate change. Like we had zero emission zones or low emission zones were existed, etc. But also the EU, as we could learn already from the MEP, is increased their level of ambition. I mean, recently they said we want to go to 55% CO2 reduction by 2030, and it's crystal clear that without hydrogen we will never reach that. And as you heard, the stance of the EU even last year drastically changed to become much more supportive for the hydrogen. And this happened due to various reasons. But one, I think, one or two important reasons was, of course, the study that DGNR did. They have updated the primes model to include hydrogen, and what came out was quite impressive, because they learned that actually the CO2 reduction potential by including hydrogen went from 84 to 96%. And at the same time with a lower abatement cost, because the cost went from 182 euro to 88 euro per ton CO2. So in addition, we also had in Europe a value and supply chain study we did. And this study showed the huge potential to create jobs and growth in Europe. And especially also, we realized that we were actually leading on electrolyzers in Europe. And all this basically led, as we heard, to the European Hydrogen Strategy, the Clean Hydrogen Alliance, the IPCEI, many things were launched last year. And we can only be happy for that. But also we experienced such a strong attention or support for hydrogen during last year's stakeholder forum. You know that we have every year a stakeholder forum. Last year we said, okay, let's organize an entire week. We call it the first European Hydrogen Week. And we had more than 10,000 people really joining this European Hydrogen Week. So coming back to the topic of today, the RED II. Well, as I said, it's crucial to enable the green hydrogen economy. But the appendixes, or what we also call the delegated acts, we are still waiting for that. And actually, they are crucial for the industry because they need to know how it looks like in order to do the investments. And so today, we really want to hear from everybody, from you. What are the red tapes, or what are the issues or the barriers that you face during executing your project? So please share such an experience with us. It's very important. And finally, I want to conclude that the European Union will free up a lot of money for hydrogen in the coming years. And also, my next successor program, the Clean Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, you will see that the budget will increase quite drastically. But also we had the Innovation Fund and many funds, also CEF and so on, will come and support hydrogen. However, it will not be enough. We also need national and regional funding. And for that, we will launch very soon a tender, because we want to look for regions in Europe, or even national governments in Europe, that would like to cooperate with us. And for that, we would like to, as I said, we will launch this tender and try to sign MOUs for some kind of co-financing all these projects, and to really make the hydrogen economy a reality in Europe. I wish you a great discussion today, and over to you, Wouter.
Thank you very much, Bart. So I clearly listened to you to say that on the one hand, we need to make sure that there's a good and stable regulatory framework for the production of RFNBOs, so that we can get recognition. But that recognition likely is not enough. So we will need other sources of co-funding from a European level, from national level, and or regional level. So that's clearly understood. But first of all, I think the industry is looking for a framework in which they can produce this renewable hydrogen. This framework is not complete yet, because the RED II is already drafted, but because the most important clauses, appendixes, or delegated acts, as people call them, are missing. And of course, the devil is in the detail. Those details will make all the difference for industry, whether they can make a good business case or not. So on this panel discussion, but I welcome already Alexandru Floristian, who is the legal and the project manager at Hydrogen Europe. I do welcome Helene Cobal, who is the coordinator of regulatory affairs at BioMCN, which is one of the leading biomethanol producers in the Netherlands. And now, as part of the Jules project, they will also be producing renewable methanol, which they would like us to use as a transport fuel. I do welcome Rolf Tiktak, who is the managing director at Vertogas, which is the Dutch organization which is already currently producing biomethane GOs, issuing biomethane GOs, as well as organizing a certification system to show compliance with the Dutch renewable fuel units, or hernieuwbare brandstofeenheden, as they say in the Netherlands. I welcome Didier van Osselaar, who is program manager at the energy transition at Port of Antwerp, where he's amongst leading a power to methanol project. And I welcome Rosa Lanois, who is managing manager at public affairs at ENGIE, the business unit of hydrogen. So this is our panel. Everybody will be given 2 to 3 minutes and a general introduction onto the topics. I would like to remind the people what are the main questions we would like to address. That's also part of the agenda. So the main questions are: what are the current barriers to the commercial deployment of RFNBOs? What are the main regulatory uncertainties and gaps in the existing legislative framework, RED II? What should be the additionality principle that can be applied? How can the barriers to uptake RFNBOs be addressed through the RED II delegated acts and its as well as the RED II revision? And what should be the key design elements of enabling a regulatory framework for RFNBOs? So let's start by listening to Alexandru. So being part of Hydrogen Europe, I think you have a very systemic overview on all of Hydrogen Europe members which are trying to develop these projects, which will, I guess, come to you and complain about certain regulatory showstoppers. So what's your perspective? What's your synthesis view on the gaps, barriers of the RED II, and how can we remove them? Alexandru.
Thank you very much, Wouter. Thanks a lot for inviting me to take part of this panel. I think the topic is extremely important, especially as we've heard before from Maria, in light of the new commitments that the EU has taken on the climate side. Firstly, I want to start by saying thank you to Bart and to the FCHJU. Much of the reason why we are here today speaking about large-scale deployment of hydrogen and RFNBOs in Europe and how they could help with the climate goals is the result of the work of the FCHJU in the past 10 years to implement a strategic long-term research and innovation agenda that we now have the technologies ready to make a real impact. So the FCHJU will continue to work on even better technologies, and we are very proud to be part of the public-private partnership on research and innovation. With that being said, today's focus is on deployment. We are talking about taking the technologies that we have developed at great cost and effort and putting them to work in the real market. So this is the topic of today. And of course, with the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive coming up, I'm sure that this panel will point out and focus on the weaknesses of the directive and debate how these could be overcome. But I think it is fair, before we engage in a critique of the RED, to acknowledge what the directive does well. I have witnessed, as you said, firsthand, that as soon as the directive was adopted, the stakeholders and industry increased significantly their efforts to roll out a renewable deployment. The directive itself, the existence of it, triggered the development of a very large number of projects. It has accelerated the plans to increase the production and use of renewable energy and renewable-based fuels. And this is very, very true for hydrogen. For hydrogen, the Renewable Energy Directive acted as a trigger for large-scale renewable hydrogen development. The main focus of the directive is to create a larger market for renewable solutions, a market that puts those renewables on a path towards long-term competitiveness and eventually enables them to replace fossil fuels. I think the directive proves that binding targets work. It proves that they have a real impact in moving Europe towards renewable solutions and away from fossil fuels. That being said, I'm afraid that this is where I run out of positive things to say about the RED II. I hope I won't offend anyone if I try to be direct and speak openly about the weaknesses that I can see. And unfortunately, the RED II has a number of fundamental weaknesses that unfortunately cast a very large shadow over the positives. So let me start by being specific. The targets are not ambitious enough and certainly not appropriate in light of the goal of net neutrality and the now revised goal of 55% emission reductions by 2030. Secondly, the multipliers, and there is a good logic in having multipliers, but the way they are defined now, not only do they dilute the very targets which are not ambitious enough to begin with, but create significant competitive distortions between the renewable solutions that could be employed to comply with the directive. And hydrogen is the solution which suffers the most from the discriminatory nature of the multipliers. Let me give you an example. Despite its higher CO2 reduction potential and using hydrogen in refineries is 2.5 times more effective at CO2 reduction than compliance via second-generation ethanol, it is second-generation biofuels that get both a multiplier and a specific minimum target. The second fundamental weakness is that of imports and the role of imports in increasing the share of renewable energy in the various sectors. The role of import is just not clear enough. It closes or at least narrows an important pathway for renewable energy consumptions. There are other weaknesses as well, but I want to focus on what we observe to be the biggest weakness of the directive. And that is the criteria imposed on RFNBO production. And by criteria, I mean specifically additionality, but also to a smaller extent, temporal and geographical correlation. So let me try to expand a little bit on this to set the stage for today's discussion. By 2024, we are mapping projects amounting to 2.4 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity to be installed in Europe. This is approximately 40% of the goal of the EU hydrogen strategy for 2024. So if you look at absolute terms, this is not much. It's a small start, but it is absolutely critical in order to kickstart, to start the market, to prove that renewable hydrogen can be the solution. It is promising to be. Almost none of these projects have reached the final investment decisions. And the main reason why they haven't is the legal uncertainty that the RED II and other EU acts caused. Additionality, as it is defined now, is, and pardon for the word that I choose, is a killer for the nascent, for the newborn hydrogen market. Instead of doing what it's supposed to do, to act as a trigger for more renewable energy deployment, it has the opposite effect. It stalls or disrupts heavily the projects that we need to kickstart the market. And to be clear to everybody listening and to the rest of the panel, we agree that increased demand for renewable energy should be met with additional renewable generation capacity. That is something we fully support. But the burden for this cannot fall on hydrogen production alone. not only is it highly discriminatory, but it is counterproductive. Hydrogen alone cannot shoulder all the burden. Just to set the stage for today's discussion, I want to say that we consider the RED as a game changer, as a legislative instrument that has the potential to create a real and significant market for renewable energy in general, and an important role for hydrogen within a mix of many, many good solutions. But the Renewable Energy Directive 2, 2018 recast, it gives with one hand and takes with the other. So we must look at the future revision as an opportunity to correct the wrongs and the weaknesses of the RED II. I would stop here, as I want to hear for the rest of the panelists, and I welcome the discussions.
So thank you very much, Alexandru. So I think we're going more and more into a filter. So we had, first of all, Mrs. Spiraki as well as Bart Bieberg picking the overview of hydrogen into the energy transition. Now we're focusing already more in the RED II, where we already make two different points. On the one hand, we're saying what are the general weaknesses of the RED II as per Hydrogen Europe. When you talk about the targets not being ambitious enough, you talk about the multipliers, which are discriminatory for hydrogen. And then you've also been talking about the famous delegated act, where you've been basically naming them. You have a geographical and temporal correlation. You have 70% greenhouse gas emission reductions, and you have additionality, of which you see additionality to be the main weakness of the RED II, and to use your words, to be the killer, because it's counterproductive, and that the renewable electricity expansion responsibility is a responsibility of the electrolyzer operator. So I think that's a very good overview. And now maybe we should listen to a couple of project developers. Didier, might I give you the first opportunity, based on your experience of power to methanol Antwerp and the overall experience you have of all energy projects in the port of Antwerp, to see whether you can relate to the topics that have been raised by Alexandru and give an introduction on that?
I can certainly try, Wouter. Thanks very much, and thanks also for having us as a Port of Antwerp. As you are aware, industrial ports have a key functionality in the energy supply of our society. And from our perspective, I think we cannot underestimate the role and the importance of wind and sun-based molecules in our complete energy transition. These wind and sun-based energy carriers, feedstock carriers, fuel carriers, they bring the abundantly available sun and wind to our consumers. And I think this abundance is an important thing to mention, because we often feel that the RED II is going forward on the idea of an absolute scarcity, which I think is a bit behind us. There is sun and wind abundantly available, and this perhaps is also a point of difference with regards to biomass. I'll come back to that in 2 minutes. If you ask us what about the investment drive from us as a Port of Antwerp, but in general from industry, I think if you look at all the communication on ambitions on projects in Belgium, in the adjacent member states, you cannot neglect the fact that industry is quite ready to start investing in the production of electromolecules. Industry meaning technology providers, producers, utilities, and off-takers. But in order to be able to do so, and I think a lot of relevant elements have already been mentioned by my predecessors, I think we need two very important things. Investors need an outlook on a viable business case. They need to have a positive outlook on market value and on production costs. And in terms of RFNBOs and in terms of the RED II, and this means we really need a clear, a stable, a workable set of regulatory production criteria, and meaning PPAs. The long-term green PPA thought is inscribed in Article 27 of the RED II, but we are still waiting for these very crucial delegated acts. We know that the RED III is upcoming. What will this bring? Will this shed a different light on the value of the contribution of hydrogen and hydrogen fuels? Certification and guarantees of origin, already mentioned by my predecessor. We need a system of certificates and guarantees of origin that allows easy imports, easy cross-border exchanges, easy access to all different kinds of transportation modes, including ships and pipelines. And we need clarity on the LCA part, clarity and stability. So very important in terms of being able to create a viable business case. And secondly, I think we all need an outlook on a viable demand market. That means a market that is right in size, and an outlook on a viable market position for the RFNBOs. In terms of market size, I think we can say that this is quite minimal under the RED II, certainly given the presence of the mandatory category of the advanced biofuels, a category that has a luxury of being allowed a multiplier. And the same thing goes for market position. We do not have this level playing field that we should have as a technology, as a feedstock, with regards to the biofuel, the advanced biofuels. So these are the two main things, besides, of course, some government funding, member state, European, to have this very first kickoff. But we really do need now and on the longer term an outlook on a positive business case and on the right size of demand markets. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Didier. So I do remember that I do see that you confirm one of the main topics mentioned by Alexandru, mainly that there's no quota system for RFNBOs, that we don't have a multiplier and that's discriminatory, and that market really needs a clear view on demand. The fact that the delegated acts, that they better be there sooner or later. And that well, in the past, when the RED II was being drafted, we were afraid that there was be a shortage of electrons, and that adding electrolyzers to the grid was simply increasing the electrical load and diverting scarce renewable electrons away from electricity consumption. You're saying that sun and wind are becoming abundant. We might touch upon this a little bit later onwards into the panel discussion. But I think you're ready for this clear overview. Then I would like to ask Rose Lanois to what are her views on this current RED II. And Rose, if I understood right, you would like to focus on how the requirements put on renewable electricity supply impact project development. So you're really going to focus on the delegated acts, additionality, and geographical temporal correlation. The floor is yours. And please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you to the organizers of this conference. Very much appreciated to be on this panel. Within ENGIE, we are developing renewable hydrogen projects across the world, and in particular within different member states in the EU. The topic of the supply of renewable electricity for the production of hydrogen is critical when you think of the fact that the renewable electricity can account to up to 70% of the cost of hydrogen. So the value of having RED I, RED II is undeniable, as it has been said before. It shows how it can support the critical start of technologies which are not fully commercially available at the beginning. But when we look at the debate that has arisen around the delegated act of RED II, and it illustrates how the supply of electricity can then become a major barrier in the short term for renewable hydrogen. So let me explain why. In general, our projects are targeting the supply of renewable hydrogen to clients which are operating baseload, mostly baseload. That means we have to provide them a flow of hydrogen continuously. While when you look at the supply of renewable electricity, it is by essence intermittent, solar on a day basis, wind on a week, if not even several weeks basis, when you have sometimes very large differences. And you also see a difference in seasonal effect between winter and summer. So when you compile the critical, the criteria, such as additionality, regionality, and temporality, in order to supply the hydrogen baseload in the current market condition, there is a triple effect. Once, you need to increase the megawatt capacity of your renewable assets. Second, you have to increase the megawatt capacity of your electrolyzer to take profit of the peak production of the renewable electricity. And thirdly, you need to create huge storage capacities on site to store the hydrogen from the peak production in order to deliver your hydrogen baseload. The combined effect can dramatically impact on the levelized cost of hydrogen. So in conclusions, we believe that the requirements could be a very effective market barrier, and we believe that it should be linked to the preliminary achievement of infrastructure for hydrogen, ensuring that large storage capacities are available, such as salt cavern solutions, that additional renewable capacity deployment is supported and is realized, and that we have a certain level of capacity of development in the electrolyzer so that we can achieve the cost reduction which arise from the scaling up of the manufacturing processes. So this is a really focus on the effect of a potential delegated act with stringent criteria from the start in the short term when we don't have yet new additional renewable capacity and infrastructure available for hydrogen. I am not bringing up the issue of the complexities of subsidies and support scheme. I hope I'll have the opportunity to discuss that further on in the panel discussion. Thank you.
So Roos, thank you very much for this introduction. I find this very, very relevant. You're basically saying that the need for storage, the need for capturing the last electron, everything, all those requirements are pushed onto the individual project developers rather than making sure that they can focus on the production of hydrogen and having other parties like salt cavern operators make sure that this storage function is being done and that they can provide the storage function for multiple hydrogen producers. Putting the burden on every single individual project is yielding a high levelized cost of hydrogen production. Thank you for this very good input. Let's go to Helene of BioMCN. I personally think you will be shedding a very nice perspective. BioMCN has already for years been producing biomethanol based on the big reactors you have available in Northern Netherlands. Up till now, that was done by using a combination of biomethane through biomethane certificates as well as biogenic CO2. And now you're looking forward in also the production of RFNBOs. Tell us, what regulatory barriers are you facing?
Yeah, let me start by thanking you for giving me this opportunity to tell about our experiences and also to tell a little bit about BioMCN. We are a big methanol plant in the north of the Netherlands. We are producing around 900,000 tons of methanol, grey methanol and biomethanol. And we are looking into ways to replace natural gas as a feedstock by sustainable alternatives. So we are currently using biomethane as a sustainable feedstock, but also looking into other sources, including green hydrogen. And yeah, the end markets that we're looking at are chemical markets, but also the transport market, where the transport market is currently regulated. We would already today be capable of using green hydrogen for the production of an e-methanol, and we would already be able to deliver our e-methanol into the chemical sector and into the transport sector, blending it into regular gasoline, or even as a transport fuel for shipping. So we are looking at the demand side, and then perhaps a kickoff for the discussion. I can agree with a lot that has been said by the previous speakers. I think currently in the development of hydrogen, there's a lot of attention for the supply side. A lot of instruments such as subsidy schemes are being developed, but there's less attention for the demand side. And I heard my previous colleague, the previous speakers also talk about this, about the multipliers and which are in place for other kinds of renewable fuels, but not for the RFNBOs or e-fuels. So that is a main barrier, and we would like to see some more focus on the demand side. And also an element that's been addressed several times already is the so-called element of additionality. One of the cost drivers of hydrogen or e-fuels is the electrolyzer. So instead of making business for electrolyzers more profitable, we are throwing up hurdles by using these additionality requirements. So the electrolyzer becomes more expensive rather than more profitable, which we need in order to be able to scale up. So I think those are the two main barriers that we experience.
Very good. So we hear very similar stories from the project developers. Before I'll give the floor to Roelof Tiktak, I would already like to mention to all the participants to this webinar that you can post your questions into your chat box, and that our team will be picking up some and putting them forward towards the panel speakers. By the way, Alex, for you already a first one is appearing here. Roelof, already mentioned by Bart Bieberg, already mentioned by Didier Van Osselaar. Not only do we have questions on how the hell should we produce this hydrogen into a RED II compliant way, but on top of that, how can we prove it? And there we come to the issue of certification. You as Vertogas have a clear role to play in this, as you're already doing in a fantastic way with regards to biomethane geos and biomethane used as a transport fuel, thanks to your collaboration with Dutch NEA, which are the emission authorities. What do you see as challenges to put in place a robust certification scheme for the uptake of RFNBOs, and what should be the key design features of such an enabling scheme?
Yeah, thank you, Wouter, for being invited. You raised quite some heavy questions towards me. And listening to the previous speakers, I only can say that football was not invented on paper. They first started playing and afterwards they made the rules. And that applies more or less for this whole certification system as well. My basic intentions are not looking so much to barriers, but more or less call them challenges, And that is the approach we see from Vertogas towards the market. If you would like to set up a robust system for certifying that the energy which you are using is coming from an renewable origin, then the first thing I would like to address is that to start off, keep it simple for the first period, and as well throughout at least Europe, keep it unambiguously. Try to harmonize as much as possible over Europe, and in that respect, looking for only a simple, maybe one GO system with one GO maybe for different energy carriers, since in the future we will be talking about energy anyway. So whether it's molecules or electrons, to my conviction, that will be one system. So keep it simple and harmonized. On the other hand, referring to my football remark, I think you should try to avoid in the first period over-regulation, because you should give the market a chance to develop, and based on the developments and the experience, see what you really need in the regulation. Of course, you need some to start off, but don't start with over-regulation. Collaboration, as I said, is a very important issue. From Vertogas, we are having a seat in the board of the European Gas Registry, ERGAR, and we are seeking collaboration with AIB and Certify, because we see the clear need for the future to have a combination in experience, and to combine in a way that you focus on one system, a simple system, as I said. So one vision that should help the market to develop any further, but do it step by step. Don't hurry too much. Oversee the market, see what the needs are, see what the requirements are. And quite importantly, I would like to mention that a lot of regulation is set up from here and now, from today, rather than looking towards the future and see what the requirements and the needs are in the future, and calling them back to today and see, okay, if that is the future, if that is what I would like to achieve, what should I know in the current system to change towards that future? I think that is a very important statement to make. And look at the free transfer into at least in Europe, but for hydrogen, I can imagine that you should even look further. It's a global, it might be a global market, so like LNG. So look into that one as well, in order to create a level playing field. I think if you would ask me how would that develop, how would the development in future, I think these are the statements I really clearly want to make. Thank you.
By referring to soccer, such wise words coming from somebody from the same nation that produced Johan Cruyff, so I think we better carefully listen to that advice. Yeah, I completely agree. So certification is one of the important topics, and it's very important that we keep it simple to start with, and we have an integrated approach, as energy conversion will be happening more and more often. So thank you for everybody to set a little bit the scene. The first question I was going to go back towards Didier. Didier, you mentioned during your opening address that sun and wind currently it's abundant, that it's not a scarcity anymore, and that there's a difference with regards to biomass. You introduced this topic. Could you expand a little bit on this?
Yeah, sure, Wouter. I think with regards to synthetic renewable molecules, just perhaps to broaden the topic a bit further than just the the focus on synthetic fuels. If you see what kind of dynamics are emerging throughout the globe, we're talking Chile, we're talking several countries in the Sahel, we're talking Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the Emirates. We're basically talking all over the world. And if you look just at the maps and at the enormous potential there is based on solar and wind energy and the combination of both, then it is clear that there is no scarcity in energy. There perhaps is a scarcity in supply up to now, but there's no scarcity in the feedstock we need. And the countries that have the potential, that have the full out hours, they are ready to move and they are ready to throw themselves on this completely new type of sustainable economy. And there, a demand market emerging from the European Union might actually prove to be exactly what is needed to lift off this global economy. Now, we should not neglect, of course, the potential we have within the European Union. We're talking complementary. We should focus on imports that can create a portfolio effect, that can stabilize the system, reduce intermittency. We should also focus on the North Sea. We should focus on our continental potential. And if you add all that, then there is no scarcity. And I don't know if some of you saw our communications yesterday. We have been working behind the scenes for more than a year in our hydrogen coalition, and we have communicated the numbers it comes down to, and the cost is not that big to start importing these hydrogen volumes coming from sunny and windy regions. And if I compare this was the second element in your question, to biomass, we should not beat around the bush. If we look at what has happened in the last 15 years, in terms of accidents, in terms of debates on what to do with this nearly sunk investment on third generation, with these big hopes on the advanced biofuels that may be or may not be. But guys, we only have 20 to 30 years left to do the thing. And doing the thing means becoming fully renewable, fully circular, fully climate neutral. And if I look then at the odds, I'd say let's use whatever we can, but let's certainly give hydrogen economy, give renewable synthetic molecules and fuels all the chances they deserve, and please allow them to contribute to a maximum to our European energy transition.
I'm going to continue on this. So Didier, there's being asked by Tom Berg of Sky Energy. So they are procuring, if I have it right, they are procuring all of the transport fuel for KLM, and they're in the Jules 2 project. They said they heard a couple of times there's no shortage of electrons. In theory, that's true. But the renewable energy deployment won't be fast enough to keep up with the enormous hydrogen, the demand of electricity for hydrogen. In any case, the grid will not have been decarbonized before we see large-scale hydrogen deployment. Is it to you a good alternative or adaptation to the additionality and the correlation principles to ensure, and now I need to cheat a little bit, to ensure, I got it almost. Yeah, to ensure hydrogen does not incentivize fossil fuel power generation. So can you deal with that, Didier? And then afterwards, I will also ask the same question to Roos.
And I see that Alexandru also would like to reflect on the question, Wouter. That's a big question. It's clear we of course do not want additional power demands emerging from electrolysis, adding to the deployment of additional fossil power plants. I think that is clear. I think what is also clear is that if we do things right, then this additional demand could actually prove to be an extra impulse to allow more investments, for instance, in offshore wind energy. So yes, we should be careful, but throwing up thresholds, making legislation enormously complex is also not the way forward. So you're right. Let's keep on being careful, but also let's try to move forward, knowing that our mission is clear, that timing is limited, and that our options are also limited.
Thank you for this insight. Before I give the word to Roos, Helene, you apparently also have a clear view on that. Can you share your thoughts?
Yes. I think it's good to hear that that there's not a scarcity of electrons, because from our point of view we would need a lot of renewable electricity to fully transition our plant towards sustainable feedstock. So in order to replace natural gas for our 900,000 ton production plant, we need approximately 1.2 gigawatt of renewable electricity. So the first one to be able to offer that to us is welcome.
Yeah, so indeed, we're talking about this is only bio MCN. I guess there's more methanol used in Europe than the 900,000 tons that you are producing, even though you're one of Europe's largest producers, and you alone would already need 1.2 gigawatts. Alexandru, you clearly have an opinion about that, so feel free to share.
Yeah, so we all started from the perspective here of additionality and the effect that it has on on the hydrogen sector, and we all agreed in the panel that the effect is killing or effectively stalling the market. However, any kind of discussion on additionality, it's fair enough, should address the concerns behind why we have additionality in the first place. So all the questions that I see coming in, that I think are fair questions that should be answered. And of course, I want to react to this. Where is this concern? Where is this coming from? Is it correct? And what is it that we can do about it? So I would like to react to that, because of course the discussion on that should be made. Now it should be, first of all, it should be made clear about what we're talking about. A renewable hydrogen producer generates demand exclusively for renewable energy. One cannot and should not be allowed to produce renewable hydrogen unless they can prove that they have used renewable sources to do so, and also that they comply with the GHG emission methodology and that threshold. So first thing you need to say that it is false to state that renewable hydrogen producers generate demand for fossil-based power. To say so in this way is incorrect and frankly manipulative. Now, that being said, where does additionality come from? From the legitimate fear that when creating extra electricity demand by the electrolyzer, so again, the demand is for renewable power, this will lead indirectly and outside of the intention of the hydrogen producer to increased power generation for fossil sources to compensate for that increased demand. So everything that we discussed so far was about that right now, as additionality is being defined, that burden, that residual mix is the responsibility of each individual renewable energy producer. And that is unbearable as a burden. That has to be understood. The effect of that was of this obligation will mean that the demand for renewable energy that is due to and is needed by the hydrogen sector will never materialize. This is a lose-lose situation. That's the problem here. Now, however, that fear that I mentioned is flawed for several reasons. So the first reason, and I mentioned, putting that responsibility on the individual hydrogen producers is deeply unfair and simply counterproductive. Now, we've been asked to put the burden of proof of what other additionality, how it could look like. We don't know, but we're saying, as we said, the burden to ensure that additional demand for renewable energy is placed on all energy consumers. This is a system of additionality has to be built around this principle. Renewable hydrogen, it is not the only demand for renewable energy. Demand for renewable energy comes from everywhere. It is not fair for that obligation and burden to be placed solely on hydrogen. But I want to talk even further about the fear itself. This fear ignores a basic economic principle, the basic economic rule of supply and demand. Renewable hydrogen creates exclusively demand for renewable energy. Basic economic logic says more demand leads to more supply of energy. What proponents of additionality as it is defined now believe is that the demand for renewable electricity is highly elastic. Basically, they believe that when a renewable hydrogen producer enters the market and begins claiming renewable energy for himself, the renewable electricity consumer, such as me, I have a contract and I only consume renewable electricity, or a data center, or a supermarket, or anybody else for that matter, will not be given renewable power anymore. And they will just accept to be supplied with fossil-based power. That's just not the case. What will happen is that the distribution system operator will make sure that they contract sufficient renewable energy to make sure that they meet the demand. Thirdly, and I want to make this clear, that the production of hydrogen using grid electricity comes from small projects. This is what I said at the beginning of relatively small projects. This is what I said at the beginning of my statement. These projects are scattered across Europe. These are, in relative terms, a drop in the ocean compared to the size of the electricity market. Any possible negative impacts that may occur, and I don't think there are, they are small and short-lasting, and yet they are absolutely critical that we enable renewable energy integration in every sector, not just in the power sector. Of course, we need to decarbonize the power sector, but we can't wait until 2027, 2028 to start putting electrolyzer so we begin diverting electricity, renewable energy towards transport or towards industry. We simply cannot wait. We need to start putting projects this year and make sure that renewable energy is integrated in all the sectors, not just in the power sector. And finally, I want to say this as well, and anybody who wants to have a legitimate conversation about this should come to us. Even if the worst fears would be true, and we don't believe for 1 second that they are, actually the net effect in a number of countries is actually positive. Moreover, depending on where you use the hydrogen in which sector, the net effect is still positive in even more countries. Let me give you an example. I know the RED II is about transport, but some people are actually talking about expanding additionality to other sectors. Let me give you an example. If you produce renewable electricity with grid power, and if the system would generate demand for fossil fuel power based on the electricity mix of that country, and I don't believe that this is the case, but if that happens, and that hydrogen goes to the steel sector and replaces coal, you have a net positive effect in the worst case scenario in all countries in the EU except Estonia. And this is what we're talking about. Several reasons from the unfairness and the effects that it has on the hydrogen sector to the end that even in the worst case scenario is not as bad as it says. And we need to have a conversation about this because a balance needs to be struck.
What is Hydrogen Europe? So you say this additionality, let's put it aside for the reasons that you mentioned. Do you offer anything in return, Alex? So what do you propose as an alternative to the current additionality requirements put forward by the RED? For instance, we are aware that in Germany that there is a legislative action in the course of preparation, which is saying that additionality does not have to be demonstrated by electrolyzer operators, provided that the electrolyzer will provide system services flexibility to the electricity grid. What is Hydrogen Europe's proposal on how to deal with additionality?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we've actually been from the day one that the RED II was adopted. We've been working constructively with the industry and with the European Commission to come up with solutions to strike this balance. And under the delegated act, fully within the respect to the current provisions, we have provided a 20-page proposal on how we can work with exactly the way that the directive is being done now to at the very least, try to make sure that on the short term, these projects can take place. It's a 20-pager that goes into a lot of details, and I don't think it's the right time to do so. So that is, of course, as we're talking about the RED II and how to implement the criteria with full respect to the definitions and to the requirements of the RED II. There are solutions. They're not optimal, but they can be applied, and we have a position. I'm speaking now about a potential revision of the directive, which, of course, it will become law years from now. And in that, when you ask me for a proposal, I cannot say more than what I said before. We need to make sure that renewable energy generation demand is met with additional renewable generation capacity. It's normal. That obligation has to come and has to be put on all that burden on all energy consumers, not just on hydrogen. Now, how that measure and how that system is defined is of course a discussion that goes much broader than just Hydrogen Europe.
Okay, thank you very much for that element, Roos. So you are developing together with ENGIE a lot of concrete projects. What do you suffer with regards to additionality, and does ENGIE foresees any alternatives to the additionality requests to ensure that fossil power generation will not be incentivized?
Thank you, Walter. First, I would like to support the comments of Alessandro. I'm completely in line with that. May I give some ideas, not necessarily the final solution, but the ideas of how we would see additionality and correlation. So we think it's a stepwise approach. As I mentioned, putting all the burden only on hydrogen from the start, it's just a killer for the market. If you look at it more generally, and if you look at it as a stepwise approach, we do see that there is some tools in the market that you can use, for example, power purchase agreement, where you could see that stepwise a share of the supply of electricity is fulfilling totally the conditions of additionality, and that can be tracked and it can be demonstrated, and that would show precisely how the investments through the PPA is supporting the development of new renewable assets. I think it is also important to recognize that when you, in the case of developing a electrolyzer at the same time of developing a renewable asset, you see that there's a completely different timeline for the production, for the development. And you could very well expect to have the electrolyzer operational before the operational time of the renewable asset. And there it should be recognized that in such case, the electrolyzer can benefit of its renewable recognition, provided that it is linked to the future operation of the renewable asset. What is extremely important, whatever what you put on, is that if you decide a set of measures for project, let's say taking a final investment decision in 2022, that those conditions apply for the whole lifetime of the electrolyzer. Because if you have the uncertainty that throughout the time, let's say 5 or 10 years later, the rules are changing, as a developer, you cannot base your business development, your business case on secure grounds, and you'll have no bankability whatsoever of your project. So whatever the rules apply, it applies for the whole lifetime of the project. Maybe I'll leave others to take up some actions, but we can also talk about temporality and the availability of guarantees of origin in the market. Today, they are not available everywhere, and certainly not on a standardized approach, and that is a complex issue also for the PPAs and for the general way we can clarify the supply of our electricity. Thank you.
Voilà. So I think I like to round up a little bit on this question of additionality. I think that important things have been said. So Alexandru has been mentioning the clear economical logic that more demand for more renewables will lead to more renewable electricity supply. This also been supported by Roos, who brings even an additional element to the table. So she refers to the fact that the RED II is mentioning that an additional renewable electricity plant should come into operation on the moment or after that the electrolyzer becomes operational. So there's clearly a problem in synchronicity of project development. Typically, an electrolyzer takes 2 to 3 years to build, whereas an offshore wind park might take 7 to 10 years to build. So that needs to be solved, and corporate PPAs could have a very good relevance over there. Roos touches upon a very important topic with regards to temporality. So in case you supply renewable electricity through the grid, you need to demonstrate that the electrolyzer is consuming electricity at the moment that the wind farm is actually producing electricity. By the way, you also need to demonstrate that the line in between is not congested. It's what they call geographical correlation. Now, a basic issue is that guarantees of origin, they don't have a 15-minute, 1 hour, or 1 day timestamp. They rather have a month in the best case timestamp, or a year timestamp. So there's also an issue in improving this synchronicity. Does anybody of the panelist speakers, and you can raise your hand, wants to add something on temporal correlation? No? Okay. Alex, you go.
The aspect of temporal correlation, as you mentioned, is a difficulty that's created by the lack of available means to prove it. In particular, the lack of adequate timestamps on GOs, and the administrative burden that comes, or in some cases purely impossible to prove that. That being said, it is not a major barrier, and of course some improvements can and should be done in temporal correlation. It should at the same time not be too strict, because once again, the fears and effects of perhaps small differences between the time of production and the time of consumptions are immaterial. Again, this is something that we worked with in the context of the Delegated Act, and we believe solutions are there. However, the question is when can be applied and how to do it in a way that doesn't generate a significant administrative burden. It is not a killer. Solutions can be found to this. What Rose said was important, though, especially when you come to geographical correlation, where geographical correlation is a means to incentivize the deployment of electrolyzers where they have the most positive impact on the overall functioning of the power market, so not to put them on the other side of congestions. What is here, this is not a major issue, not major in the sense of it's not an unsurmountable barrier such as additionality, and it can make sense, but it does create some issues, especially when, depending on how you define the geographical zone. If, for example, you cannot make use of international connections that simply are not bottlenecks, and you could absolutely make use of those. And I think what is most important here is what Rose said, that you have to give certainty to an electrolyzer producer. If from a geographical correlation perspective, it was okay for him to invest in his electrolyzer in 2023 and put it somewhere, this cannot change in 2028, and all of a sudden he's being told, sorry, you're on the wrong side of a congestion, you may no longer produce renewable hydrogen. That is, of course, a complete disaster, and that would be an absolute killer.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that everybody mentions we need to have a stable regulatory framework. If somebody invests today into an electrolyzer and the line with this renewable electricity asset is in general uncongested, he should not bear the burden that in the future this line for God knows which region becomes congested. I would like to maybe give the floor before we move to the next panel to Helene and or Didier, because you are really you're producing methanol and you're, I think, in direct contact with your off-takers. What do you perceive to be the biggest regulatory challenges for you in finding customers of this RFNBO? Anybody wants to share some insights? Helene, you go first.
Yeah. Yes, so we already deliver our biomethanol into the transport sector, and we are currently, there's a lot of interest for our biomethanol from the chemical sector, but also from the shipping sector. And that is, of course, an interesting sector because that's difficult to electrify. And if you look at pure hydrogen, it has a lower energy density than methanol has. So methanol is for some shippers is a preferred option. Also because it has low NOx, SOx, and particle matters emissions. So it's a good shipping fuel. But then the current RED II, of course, offers the framework where member states can incentivize the use of shipping fuels under the current national blending mandates. So the framework offers the possibility of an opt-in for shipping fuels, and also the possibility of a multiplier of 1.2 for shipping fuels. But that is up to member states to implement. So we have a very fragmented European playing field. So it would be good to have a more harmonized approach, a more EU-wide harmonized market. And also, if we're looking at the e-fuels, at the e-methanol, then of course costs are still rather high. So the interest is there from the shippers, but if they compare it to their current fuels, then the gap is too big. And also we see a lot of, in the Netherlands, there was an opt-in for shipping, which led to a huge amount of biodiesel being blended into the shipping pool. And due to lower fuel quality specifications, it is cheaper to use a biodiesel in shipping than it is to use that similar biodiesel in road transport. So there was a lot of, well, let's say fairly, relatively cheap bio tickets created in the shipping market. So we see the shipping market as a potentially interested market for our e-fuels, for our e-methanol, but the pricing in shipping for biofuels is very low. So an e-fuel will never be competitive in competition with other biofuels in that market. So that is something that we struggle with, that we see a lot of demand or a lot of inquiries from the shipping sector. Okay, what can you do? How sustainable is your fuel? Can you offer an e-fuel? And yes, we can offer an e-fuel, but at what costs?
Okay, so I hear clearly not only do we have good features to produce RFNBO methanol, everything that we discussed before, it's also important to work on a market pull, for instance, by offering an attractive multiplier and maybe measures to bridge the gap with from a cost perspective with other alternatives. Didier, do you relate to that?
Yeah, do it. Sorry.
Helene?
No, sorry, I just wanted to add that, of course, the RED offers that framework, but for example, a multiplier, even a multiplier of 2 would probably not yet cover the costs, because you're in competition with electrical vehicles that have very cheap ways of generating tickets, but also with cheap biodiesel. So a multiplier, we don't think it will be sufficient. Of course, the most secure way would be to introduce a specific target for e-fuels.
Okay, that's clear. Didier?
To a certain extent, a similar story we'd also see an emerging interest from shipping. Same thing goes for chemical industry, but in neither of those sectors, indeed, the willingness to pay actually the price that is needed to make a synthetic methanol plant fly. So the players we need, of course, are those players that feel the pressure of the RED II fuel obligations, the blenders, those who have the blending targets. And in the discussions we have with those kinds of market players, even when we state that we are willing to take the regulatory risk, so we are willing to talk only on volumes of methanol that we will ensure that are certified as being RED II compliant. But then you clearly see that even in such a context, the parties with the blending obligations, they are waiting for more clarity on the market, on what kind of demand there will actually be, and what kind of playing field that will settle with the advanced biofuels. They are basically looking at the prices that will be set per unit of energy, joules or megawatt hours. And so what their willingness to pay could be for RFNBOs. And as long as they don't have a bit of a feeling of how that market would start behaving, it will be difficult to close contracts that actually pay the price.
So basically you're saying that oil blenders want to have a clear view on what will be the merit order what are the different technological solutions they have to use to get up to their target. And as long as they don't see that, typically it's the last technology they're not really ready to buy into yet, because they might not need it yet to satisfy their target. So Alexandro mentioned at first that a more ambitious targets could help other people's, that specific quota on e-fuels might help levelized playing field, at least with multipliers, so that at least in the merit order, e-fuels start to get more interesting towards the other alternatives that can all help. I think it was a very interesting panel. I'm going to close with a question for Vertogas. Many people know that the RED II is my hobby, and that within the RED II certification is my even more dedicated hobby. So, Rolf, we see that in the European Commission, there's really two big discussions happening. On the one hand, people say we need to extend book and claim systems towards all energy carriers, toward all kind of usages. The other section is saying we should abolish all GOs, including for electricity, and we should really aim at mass balancing systems. We see that certain regions in the world are going even a step further. Also in the Netherlands, there's a little bit reluctance sometimes, we feel, with mass balancing systems, especially after a fraud case on biofuels that happened. And we see even at certain member states, like in France, we see policymakers dreaming about segregated systems. So this would mean that next to a natural gas pipeline, you put a biomethane pipeline to put two identical molecules into two different pipelines, which of course would come to a very high cost of society. Where do you see all of this going? What's your point of view? You're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, I just said if I would have had a glass bowl, I wouldn't have been sitting here this afternoon. I assume I'd have ended up in a fancy fair. But mass balancing in itself is not, let's say, an issue with regards to fraud. I know that there were some cases of fraud. If you want to jeopardize the system, you will jeopardize the system. It's up to the certifiers to have a system which is more or less watertight. But more importantly, there must be a certain way of trust as well in the market. And I think, and that is what we are debating now with the authorities as well, to revise the system in the acts, etc., in a way that there is more trust in the system. Based on maybe other legislative systems, rather than having someone looking into the system 24/7 hours a day, because that won't work anyway. So that is the one side. The other side is that you can ask yourself the question what the difference is between mass balancing and book and claim. If you look a bit more in detail to it, then you could say those systems are identically. But there is some differences in the way you describe your origin of your renewals, and okay, that is something let's say that is for discussion for the future. Indeed, I would assume that in the end you will have one system for all kinds of energy, which I stated in the beginning. But how that would be defined in detail, that is something for a glass ball, I would say, at this very moment. So that's more or less my opinion, if you ask me.
I know that mass balancing is a huge topic, Helene. I see you would like to react. In view of time, however, we really need to round it up. I know it's a passionate topic for everybody. Helene, because you're one of the two ladies on the panel, so I give you 1 minute and 1 minute sharp, and then we close this panel down. The floor is yours. 1 minute.
I'll do it quickly. There was a remark made that book and claim and mass balance are almost the same. I don't agree. Book and claim, there's not necessarily physical movement, so you do not track the sustainable material back to its producer, and in the mass balance that is the case. And if you were to imply segregation, that does not only have an impact on the pipelines but also on the production. So we would not be able to produce an e-methanol because with the production of an e-methanol we also need CO2, and so it would mean that we could not produce an e-fuel alongside a biofuel, because then our biofuel would be contaminated by the CO2. So the segregation makes it impossible to have a co-production of different kinds of renewable materials. And as said, we need 1.2 gigawatt to greenify our complete production. So we are looking at all solutions alongside each other, and that should be allowed in the future. Otherwise, there's no we can shut down our plants. So
I think to say that you completely agree with Rolf that segregated systems is not the way forward, because not only the pipelines would be different, the production devices would be different. If you put it to the extreme, it would also means that there's no more business for oil blenders, because you need to have 2 separate tanks into your vehicle, one fueling with regular diesel, the other one with biodiesel. So that's segregated systems is indeed will create quite a lot of infrastructure problems to society. And with that, I would like to close down this panel. Very interesting discussion. Took lots of notes. I'm sure my colleagues did too. And I thank all of the panel speakers for their intervention. Please do log out of this system, panel speakers. You can, via the other website, you can log in and follow the discussion of that will coming up. Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I would like to move to the second part of our workshop, where we have more of a case study on the Netherlands. And in that regard, I hope that I'm going to see Nienke Holman into my, there you go. Hello, Nienke. Appearing on the screen. You're a real policy champion. You're the regional minister for green hydrogen economy in the northern Netherlands, province of Groningen, and we know that's where it's happening. Nienke, what do you have to tell about green hydrogen, and why is Groningen and the northern Netherlands leading so much?
Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I have to say that the RED is not my hobby yet. I say, still to come, perhaps. But actually, I'm Nienke Holman, and I'm the regional minister of the province of Groningen, and it's in the north of the Netherlands. And indeed, I'm concerned with the energy transition, and as a hydrogen lady, sometimes called, and because we see hydrogen as a crucial element in the transition in our region, and I think in the world, exactly. And today we are speaking about renewable fuels of non-biological hydrogen origin. Renewable fuels of non-biological hydrogen are a key element of the development of the hydrogen economy. Namely, it's an early market to kickstart because there's already a framework for incentivizing the offtake. And this part is crucial for the initial investment decisions for green hydrogen projects, which will be made upcoming year and the next year in our region. And these green hydrogen projects are bundled in our Northern Netherlands Hydrogen Investment Plan. You can find it on the website, Northern Netherlands Hydrogen Investment Plan, and we published it in October last year. And actually, it's a better continuation of our investment plan. It's a result of our search for a life after natural gas. Because the natural gas that brought our region welfare, but it also damaged our houses due to the natural gas mining earthquakes. Even my house was damaged. So we, including myself, were extra motivated to find an alternative for heating and as a feedstock for the industry, as a new raw material. And of course, of course, we want to tackle the climate change problems. And we can only do this together. And in that regard, actually, I'm very lucky. We are fortunate to have in the Northern Netherlands a group of closely collaborating companies, governments, and knowledge institutes. And they all share the ambition and the drive to create a large-scale hydrogen economy. Actually, a large-scale hydrogen ecosystem. And we all see the unique possibilities in our region to accomplish that, because we have already a dedicated project pipeline with over 50 hydrogen projects with a total investment value of over the 9 billion euros. And the commitment of these different stakeholders is very important. There's no transition without their commitment. And that needs close triple helix organization. And I'm part of it. I'm lucky. And the transition also results in the integration of various sectors that are needed, for example, power and gas, where existing boundaries are removed and where relationships adapted. And this requires also outside the box thinking towards existing policies and legislation to really make the change happen. And of course, this change is needed due to our earthquakes and of course for the climate reasons. And we believe and we know that hydrogen is really part of this change, and it offers us and you the possibility to be a front runner, which brings us a quicker energy transition and the possibility to retain current jobs and even attracting new jobs to our different regions. And the front runner potential was recognized by the fuel cell hydrogen joint undertaken, as the Heaven project named was awarded with a grant. And the project is the starting point for the creation of the first hydrogen valley in the EU. Well, I'm proud, as you see. It was for a reason that we were recognized as this first hydrogen valley. Namely, we have a unique potential due to our location and our unique assets due to the natural gas mining. We still have the assets of the gas sector in our region. And GasUnie has an extensive gas infrastructure with the capacity to transport molecules to our region, to the Netherlands and abroad. And this potential provides us access to hydrogen, to a European hydrogen offtake markets, for example, the German Ruhr area. And besides that, we have 28 salt caverns in our region. And these can be converted to large-scale hydrogen storage facilities, an essential key element for a hydrogen economy. Highstock, it is named, is already working on that. And furthermore, we have the hydrogen trading, transport, and innovation. Also, we have physical space available and strategic locations for hydrogen production at industrial hubs and large offshore wind potential in the north of the Netherlands, above the north of the Netherlands. And last but not least, we have potential regional offtake markets in the region, where renewable fuels of non-biological origin can be made out of green hydrogen. Nevertheless, the demand side needs to be stimulated. And the RED II is a starting point to stimulate the demand side, but there are still a lot of gaps and there is still a lot of uncertainty. And therefore, we risk delay of projects in our region due to this uncertainty. And as mentioned, it is a key element for the initial development of the hydrogen economy. The target in the European hydrogen strategy is to have 40 gigawatts of electrolysis in place in 2030. To realize that, we need to start today. We need to start now, actually. And the revision of the RED II needs to use the window of opportunity to overcome this. What is needed is that the additionality criteria should not hinder the demand uptake, but it should incentivize it during the maturing and scaling phase we're now in. Furthermore, there need to be quotas with renewable shares. And last but not least, we need a robust certification system in place, which should be harmonized all over the European Union. And in this way, the EU is really kickstarting the hydrogen economy and can become the world leader in hydrogen. But we have to start now. Thank you as a start.
Thank you very much, Nienke, for this introduction. You remind me a little bit of one of the people that inspire me a lot, Richard Branson, who is the founder of Virgin Airlines, etc. And one of his famous quotes is, "Fuck it, let's do it." And I think that's what Northern Netherlands is doing. One of the, I think, an important stakeholder within your region is Patrick Knubbe of the New Energy Coalition, because he's coordinating the Heaven project. And I see Patrick is appearing. Patrick, you heard what Nienke had to say. What are your reflections on this, and what's the role, especially of hydrogen-derived fuels, transport fuels, in implementing your vision into Heaven? And you're on mute, Patrick.
Thank you. Also make that same mistake because sometimes I can't shut up. So muting is very good for me. Well, I totally agree with Nienke, but looking back to we have been rewarded with this prize of being first Hydrogen Valley, and noblesse oblige. So we have to do the good thing and take the lead in the European arena, I think. And having said that, we have this 9 billion investment plan, as Nienke Holman said. We have a very driven, let's say, regional government and regional governments. In that case, we have all the parties involved who can make that happen. So on that side, there is no hesitation that we want to do it. We can do it, and there needs to be some let's say little adjustments in for instance, the RED II, because it's about producing hydrogen and using hydrogen as, let's say, contribute to the RFNBOs production. But at currently, the RED II isn't, shall I say, if I say it bluntly, isn't really hydrogen or RNFBO ready, because the system is such that it doesn't really does the thing it needs to do to become the real king of hydrogen in the world, to become, let's say, the game changer. Parties like looking at the synthetic hydrogen-derived fuels. We have large companies here like Gazini, Nourion, BioMCN, which is exemplary in producing, let's say, fitting e-fuels. And the RED II needs to be adapted to that. It needs to fulfill its function which it should fulfill, which it can't fulfill because the legislation isn't, let's say, fully ready yet. So if we indeed want to become the real hydrogen valley, which we are and which we want to, and we want to expand it and take the lead in Europe, we need to adapt this RED II to comply with the, let's say, to comply with the goals we achieve. So it needs to be adapted. So these things, these delegated acts needs to be, let's say, updated, upgraded, or made hydrogen ready. That's I think one of the issues.
Yeah, I think the interesting part is that we really we have two phases. We have now the mature phase, and after a while we have we have the mature and scale up phase, and then afterwards we have the hydrogen economy phase where it's everywhere. And then we need a robust certification system. But we have to, if we want to reach that goal in 5 or 6 years, we really have to start now, and we can't be bothered by the additionality problems. And if we do it, then we will never kickstart the hydrogen economy. So I think there are two different phases where you need two different systems. Now to kickstart it, and then a really big system with certification.
I think everybody here is saying the same thing. We heard the opening remarks of the MEP. We heard them of the Fuels and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. We saw them of the Hydrogen Europe Association, of the individual companies developing those projects, and now regional policymakers. We need to have investment climate. The regulation needs to be fixed. Those delegated acts need to come rather sooner than later. And they must not make the first projects too complicated, because otherwise Europe is going to lose its technological leadership. we just got the news that in China, that's been traditionally focusing a lot on fuel cell vehicles to fight their local air pollution, where the hydrogen was coming from was never really a hot topic. But now they're starting to focus on green hydrogen too. So I think also as Europe, we need to kickstart this economy. We need to build the first installations. We need to test our technology, our certification systems, and be able to massively scale up later. Nienke, I leave the honor to you to maybe try to have the final closing words, and then I'm going to wrap up because we're already 1 minute over time, and Patrick knows. Patrick has less of a problem for me muting him. So
ladies last. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, we really created a hydrogen ecosystem, and for the hydrogen ecosystem, we did everything we could as a government, and that's what you can expect from a government. Put your money on it, put your public relations on it, and put all your effort in it if you really want to achieve the climate goals. And therefore, it's really essential that as a government, you support the initiatives that will help reaching the climate targets. Perfect ending.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Perfect. Thank you to everybody that participated into this conference. We had many distinguished speakers. Again, I repeat that we are recording all of this information, and the video will be made available afterwards. We're also drafting conclusions that will be sent over to the European Commission. I'd like to thank NVDE really a lot because they've been helping us to reach out to lots of Dutch policymakers and also to the panel speakers. Without them, we would have not been able to do so. We, as from Hinicio, we keep on working on the topic, and Nienke, we are part of the Heaven Project, and we're going to help everybody to all of those sub-projects to get their hydrogen certified as green. So we'll definitely meet again. I thank everybody for the participation, and I hope that more and more people are going to see the interest of the RED II, and in those Corona times, while we're in lockdown anyway, maybe that can become a new hobby also of yours. And with that, I terminate this conference. Thank you very much.